Amazing. And speaking of our super Wonder Woman, aside from our amazing presenters, a friend from Riverside mentioned a live superwoman was Michelle Obama as their superhero. So thank you for everyone for chiming in. And today's workshop is going to be navigating the California School Dashboard, particularly the many components of the College Career Indicator is definitely a challenge. So let's tackle this together. We will take you on a tour of each component, where to find the data, and how to set up students for success. As our first presenter, as mentioned earlier, Miss Superwoman Jewyl Clarke has spent 10 years teaching science and math and building career to contextualized curriculum and a medical pathway. She now supports career readiness initiatives and innovation throughout the region, empowering educators to provide opportunities for students to explore careers and determine the right path for their career goals. Our second superwoman at the San Diego County Office of Education has spent the last 2 years working with school counselors in 42 districts. Prior to her role, she was a high school counselor for 20 years in the Grossmont Union High School District. Tanya is also an adjunct instructor for the School of Education at Point Loma Nazarene, teaching graduate students in the school counseling program. One of the most important lessons that Tanya shares with her students is the importance of understanding how to analyze the California School Dashboard and knowing what to do with the information and data. The College Career Indicator reflects many ways school counselors can insert themselves into this work and better serve the needs of our underrepresented students while increasing A through G completion and graduation rates, to name a few. Welcome, super ladies, and enjoy the conference.
All right, thank you so much, Zarette. So as we mentioned, this webinar is going to focus on understanding the California School Dashboard with an equity lens. And so we're going to walk through some examples, but really highlight the areas where school counselors have a definite role. And so when looking at the California Dashboard, some things that we're going to explore and we're going to share with you. Well, first of all, what is the California Dashboard? Why is it important? We all know that you might even have questions about where do we stand with the dashboard. So we're going to also look at understanding the college and career indicators, what are called the CCI, prepared versus not prepared. There's a lot of places in that section of the dashboard where school counselors, that's the work that we do, and it is being measured. So we want to take a look at that and see how we can improve on our end and make sure that we are handling that responsibility. We're also going to be viewing, learning how to view the data with an equitable lens. And then we'll also share the role and responsibility of the school counselor in the mix of using the CCI. So we're going to show you a really quick 1-minute video that the CDE has put together about the dashboard.
Welcome to the California School Dashboard. Around the dashboard in 90 seconds.
The dashboard is designed to help us understand how well our schools are doing and where improvement is needed. The best place to begin is by looking up your child's school. Right away, we see a variety of useful information called measures. Together, these give us a more complete picture of what's happening at the school. Once each year, all the information on the dashboard is updated. The state then assigns a color rating for each measure. These ratings are based on two main things: how well the school did at a certain point in time, and whether performance went up or down. If we look at one of the academic indicators, we see that, overall, students fell 62.9 points below the standards for math, although they increased 14.3 points from last year. We can also see how students performed compared to the state average. And we can view a breakdown to see how well our schools served particular groups of students. Besides schools, we can view similar data about the district as a whole. The district section includes additional information about parent involvement and school climate and conditions. The dashboard puts clear information into our hands as parents, so we can talk with teachers and school leaders and help drive our schools to success. Are you ready to take it for a spin?
You can find more information about the California School Dashboard at www.caschool-dashboard.org. This video was produced for the California Department of Education by Californians dedicated to Education Foundation.
All right. So that was just a quick tour just to get you familiar with what it looks like. We are going to dive in a little bit deeper, but the dashboard was created so that it would give community members and schools an easy way to see how they were being measured. It is a public accessible document. And so, and let's see, we keep getting these Blackboard. Okay, there we go. So it's an online tool that's meant to be shared, and it's meant to provide the information and be very transparent. And it's designed to help communities across the state access this information. So it features those, as you saw, those little dials. They're pretty little colors. It's full of graphs. So it's meant to be very simple and easy to read. And it's one step in the way that we can change our schools and change our practices and see how we can increase all kinds of different things, as we're going to talk about in a minute.
Now, oh, this one's you, sorry.
There we go. So how does the system work? Well, one, it helps, as it says, parents and educators identify strengths and areas of improvement. So we are looking at all California schools. You're not going to find this in any other state, and it's all on mostly the high schools. And you're not going to really find many charters. So it's going to be your public schools that are going to be on this dashboard. And you're going to also see student groups and how they're performing across the state and local measures. So for the state measures, the performance is based on two things. One, the current year results. And again, we're going to talk about in a minute, what does 2020 look like? And then whether results improve from the previous year. Next slide.
So you might also wonder, well, things are changing a little bit around here. And so are we seeing dashboard updates? If you went later when we log in, or if you've been looking at your dashboard, you might notice that there's not that much there in the 2020 dashboard. And so the CDE keeps us updated on any of those changes. So obviously the 2020 dashboard looked very different from our normal dashboard. And that's because there were federal changes in our requirements for testing, which are an integral part of our dashboard itself. So what that means, and you'll be able to access all of this, but really like the general idea is that normally, and we'll talk in a minute about our measurement of change from year to year, instead of measuring from year to year, it'll be from 2019 to 2021. So we're gonna skip that 2020 data set when it comes to our change metric. And so as we go forward, the CDE does keep us updated if there are continued changes, but you can't expect at this point to see data in 2021 related to the dashboard and the college and career indicator.
So here you will see that there's multiple measures, and they're broken up into two different categories. So they have a total of 11 indicators to measure the performance. You have your state indicators as well as your local indicators. Indicators are all color-coded on the dashboard. So you see that little rainbow there. And then the 5 local indicators are going to show as being met or not met. So that's how you're going to report out on those. But I want you to take a look at these 6 state indicators. And you will see that these are where they are measuring the data. You have your high school graduation rate, academic performance, suspension rates, English learner progress, the CCI, which is preparation for college and career, which is what we're going to dive into today. And that's got counselor written all over it, as well as chronic absenteeism. So you see that the school counselor role is very heavily inserted into some of these areas, but for at least the college and career, very heavily. So what does that mean for the work that we do? And maybe how should we be changing our mindset so that we can improve in these areas on the dashboard? Next slide. So as I mentioned, there are 6 indicators, but we are really going to focus on the college and career readiness, because in that alone, there's a lot to look at and unpack. So we're going to look at that as the first area. And just to mention, this was changed right before we went into lockdown, or for 2020 for COVID. But the update was that a combined 4 and 5 year graduation rate will be used. What they were showing was that their graduation rates were low because they were looking at a 4-year graduation rate. But then we have to take into consideration students who might have an IEP, who have a little bit longer of a time in which to graduate, or for a student that needed a 5th year because they just transferred into the school from another country or from out of state. So they wanted to include those numbers in the graduation rate, which really helped. So that is new, and or was supposed to be a new update as of last year, but moving forward, it will be looked at the 5-year versus just 4-year.
All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and, whoops, present again so that it blocks out that URL there at the top. When you show a video, it can adjust what it looks like. So hopefully this looks a little better on your screen. So I want to get a little bit more in depth with you on what do we mean when we say status and change, because I think this is really one of the big things that sets this whole system of our new California dashboard into a new realm compared to our previous system, right? In the old system, it was like, we were looking for that one number of 900, or whatever it is that our school had next. But in this case, if in that system, if you were at a low number, even if you did really well, it still had kind of a negative impact on how people saw your school. In this case, what they do is they look at our status. So for example, this particular grid is around English learner progress. And so in this case, this school is at a medium status. Now, if they're at a medium status and they're just trucking along and they're not doing any better in a year, but not any worse, they would be yellow, because that would mean they're maintaining that status all the time. Let's say last year they were a little bit higher and now they've dropped down, they would be orange. But in this particular case, last year they right now they're in medium, but they have increased their status by 1.5 to 10% in the last year, and that makes them green, because what that says is even if you are at a medium level of status, you are making improvements. And so the great thing about the College and Career Indicator and the new California School Dashboard is it's really about improvement and how we can have continuous improvement in our schools. So as long as we're improving, we kind of get a little bit of a step up in our color code along the way. And so this is a great way for us to really be thoughtful, like even if we're in a system where we feel like our numbers are low, that we can impact the color that represents our work by making improvements on an annual basis. In some LEAs, if you have a really small amount of students, they'll actually not have this full 5x5 grid, but they'll have a 3x5 grid. And so if you are in a organization that has a smaller amount of students, sometimes you might see something that looks a little bit more like this instead of that bigger status and change grid. All right. And so when we get into here, we have those different colors that represent the status and change. In the beginning, you might have remembered these like pie pieces, and we kind of felt like we were playing Trivial Pursuit and collecting pies. But they have adjusted that since then. And so you'll see these little indicators here that are a little bit more like a speedometer to help us see what performance range that we're in. So let me step back. When we get into the dashboard and you get into a single area, what you get to do is it's not just about all of your students and where they're at. And today we're talking about this equity mindset. So we really want to be thoughtful about what we have in front of us. So when you look here, what do you notice are some of the data sets that we get access to in the dashboard? So anything that anyone notices here, feel free to use that chat. Let's see. No one's chatting it up, but let me just ask Tanya. So Tanya, based on this, what would be all of our students together? What color would this have? Oh, it doesn't have the all students on this one. That's interesting. Because it's it's cropped. But do we see that all students have the same numbers?
No.
Which students are doing the most successfully in this particular school or district?
That would be Filipino. And thank you.
Great. And Edith in the chat is also chiming in. Thank you. Where might we find the most areas for improvement on this particular metric for this particular school or district?
And I'll let anybody in the chat chime in. Thank you, Edith.
Great. Thank you, Edith. Yeah, that's right. So what we see here is that they're going to actually disaggregate all of your data by student group. And so this is a great way for you to get in and say like, okay, what's happening in our spaces with our African American students, our foster youth, and our students with disabilities, and how can we focus in to support them? Now, I'll tell you this, some people might say like, wow, what if they're really, really small amounts of students? If they were, they would actually land in this no performance color section. And so as we get into this, we know that there's at least 33 students in each one of these groups because they are marked with a color. And so that means that there's a large enough group that we need to have a thoughtful opportunity to improve their status on the dashboard in this particular area. Now, you also, if you have a lot of students in red in different areas, even one student group in red in multiple areas, that can actually trigger what's called differentiated assistance, which means that your district gets specialized support that is required by the state, often provided by your county office of ed. And so one of the things we want to make sure is we don't have any students fall into that red category. So looking at orange, we want to make sure that those students are in a place where we're supporting them to improve and that we definitely don't see anyone backslide. All right, so this is just to help you understand the general dashboard. But today, what we really want to do is get into the nitty-gritty of college and career ready indicator, because although there are a number of indicators, college and career ready has a lot of elements within it that all combine to create that status and that change. So there are multiple diagrams that help us understand. This is kind of like the original format that came from the CDE a while back. And what we see here is that in order for a student to be prepared, it has all of these different criteria listed. And don't worry, we're going to get into each and every one of these individually, so you don't have to like gather it all from one sheet of paper right now. One thing that's not maybe on our other ones is this idea of approaching prepared. So there are some categories where if students meet one single metric, we consider them approaching prepared. And if students meet none of these metrics, then they're considered not prepared. And all of that goes in together on our percentages for our dashboard. So this particular diagram was released by the state. However, what we saw was that it might have been a little bit confusing because we want you to see how these are bundled together. And I like to think of it, we've all probably been to Panera. And when you go to Panera, there is a menu called You Pick Two. And you can pick like half of a sandwich and a salad or a soup or, you know, all these different things. And so you can make different combinations of these elements. And it's kind of like a You Pick Two when it comes to the indicators. And so when we look at these elements, we can have like two of many of these or like a 1 plus a 1. And so we're going to dive a little bit deeper so you understand this kind of You Pick Two menu as we go through. But this particular document right here is a great place to start when you're trying to figure out who is prepared on the indicator. But let me take a pause. Zarette let us know that we do have a question. And so Zarette, before we dive into each one of these individually, where...
Real quick, if you want, I can start sharing my screen to see if it doesn't have the black bars.
Oh, are you getting the black bars still right now?
So maybe, well, there we go. Now one's gone. Yeah, it's still going. Do you want me to just share my screen?
If that is, oh, that's unusual. It may be because I'm on a single computer today instead of on my dual.
Thank you, ladies, for setting that up. Priscilla Grijalva did ask, for the new grad update, does it also include students with IEPs that come back for a 6th year or only up to 5th year?
So that is something, that's a great question, and we would definitely need to look at. That is a question, actually, as I was mentioning the 5-year and 6-year, I know that we can have our students on an IEP can be in school a lot longer. So that would be something to look at. I do know that with one of the updates that's coming up, it does talk about special circumstances with students with IEPs, but that is a great question. I don't know the specific answer to it. Jewyl, do you know the answer to that one?
I don't know that one. I think it does say 4th and 5th year. I don't know if there's an exception for IEP students. One thing to note, though, also is if you're an alternative school, there are different rules, and I don't think we have a slide about that in here, but it's called a DAS school, or DASS, and those alternative school systems, it's a 1-year cohort for graduation, so it's only, you know, the kids who they thought could graduate versus those who did. And so sometimes a lot of our alternative schools are working with students who have IEPs, so they may be able to work into that system in that way. However, I don't know if a 6th year is counted in that average.
So as Jewyl mentioned on the CCI infographic, this is a document that combines the 2 documents that you saw previously by the CDE into one infographic. A few years ago, Tracy Wilson saw it through a counselor lens and said, we need to make it a little bit easier. And she came up with these buckets, and it made total sense that way. So we did update it last year to include the new numbers, because you can see that there's 8. And so we have updated the chart to include all the new language. So if you have the old chart, you want to update it with this one. And when we give you the presentation at the end, you will have links to all of this. So I want you to take a look at this document, and it says, what areas do school counselors monitor? So if you look at this, you will see that we have a lot of areas like placing students in advanced placement classes, signing them up for college credit courses, talking to them about CTE pathways. So we're going to dive into these each individually to let you know what that looks like. But it's important for you to kind of, as we move forward, to be looking at it through that counselor lens. So let's go back one. There we go. So the first area, or number 1, is the Smarter Balanced Summative Assessment. So on this test, students need a score of level 3 or higher on both the ELA and the math. So in order to be marked prepared, this is one area of the 8 that a student can be marked prepared, which is, again, as you saw those dials, that's what you want to see. You want to see you moving over to the blue. So when we look at this document, you'll also see that there's some other areas where the Smarter Balanced assessment is also mentioned. So on this chart, you'll see that there's a lot of fingers. So if you look all the way over to number 5, for instance, and we're going to talk about that one in a second, you will see that not only does the student need to meet the state seal, but there's also an area on the Smarter Balance that they must meet as well. So I want you to kind of get familiar with how this chart is used, but to also see the other areas where a student might need to have a certain score on the ASVAB in order to be marked prepared. And then you will see for advanced placement and IB courses. So that's number 2 and 3. That used to be combined into one bucket per se, but now it is divided into 2 because not all schools have an IB program. So in this area, students need a score of 3 or higher on 2 AP exams, or on the IB, a score of 4 or more on 2 IB exams. And only one exam at this level is required if you are also an A through G completer, which we'll get to in just a second.
All right, let's talk a little bit about college credit, because this has been a bit of a confusing one. In the beginning, they called it dual enrollment, but that didn't capture the fact that we have students getting college credit in many ways, including on their own. And so they just changed the language a few years back to say college credit. Now, this data has to come from your SIS, which means that in order for a student to get any kind of brownie points for having college credit, it needs to be on the transcript as college credit. This can be done in a few ways. First of all, it could be dual enrollment, and then you probably automatically already have that coded in your SIS as a college credit course. Done, easy peasy. However, you often have students who go and they might do concurrent enrollment. Hey, it's summer, I want to go check the box and get this class taken care of. If you can incentivize students to come and bring that transcript and get, or from the college, and then transcript on their high school transcript, that can also count towards the college credit level of this. In some cases, we're also seeing articulated classes. Now, an articulated class is not considered college credit until it gets on the transcript. And so if a articulated class is, if they claim that credit with the college, bring the college transcript back, and then it can be transcripted onto their high school transcript, then it could look like college credit. And so there's a few different ways. Now, some students might choose to do college credit to make up for, let's say, like a biology class. Like they got the D on the bio class and then they go to get the college credit so that they can supersede that. If all you do is replace their old biology grade with this, nobody's going to know it's college credit. So one of the places that we see one of the biggest impacts of change on our dashboard is the cleanliness of the data that we put in. So by ensuring you have a system that anything you put into your SIS is properly coded as a college course, then you will get kind of the brownie points, the CCI completer kind of points for that particular element. So in this case, it ends up being a lot of times in the counseling office that you might hear, oh, these kids are taking college courses, and so you can work to help get those onto their transcript for high school, and now it can count as a college credit course for the CCI. In this case, we can see 2 semesters or 3 quarters being enough to count, but 1 semester or 2 quarters is enough if it's in that you pick 2, and we go college credit plus A through G, and so you can see that down below in the salmon area, or if you have college credit and a CTE pathway. So a lot of times, we'll talk about CTE in a minute, but kind of combining the 2 is a nice way to give your students a thorough experience and ensure that they meet that prepared criteria on the dashboard. And so here's just an extra note on that old language of dual enrollment that we're now calling college credit course. And so it's important that that is labeled that way. Another metric that is really specific to a district and their adoption of the state seal of biliteracy is that if students are demonstrating their proficiency in speaking, reading, and writing in at least 1 or more languages in addition to English, and they score well on the ELA exams for Smarter Balanced, then they can be given the state seal of biliteracy. Now, this has to be something that your district actually adopts and puts through and claims students in. And so there's a little bit more info on the next slide and some tools. So if you're looking to help your families understand it, maybe your district is offering, or your LEA, your charter, your district is offering the state seal of biliteracy, there's actually a bookmark and a poster that helps people understand those requirements. And on here, there's also a link to the CDE website. And I see Stephanie Howell's asking about the Language Academy. So I don't have the list of all of the districts who are doing this. I would be shocked if a Language Academy did not offer the state seal of biliteracy, but it is a district by district choice. But we do have some really great opportunities region-wide to honor our students who meet the requirements of this seal. There are other seals out there. I know they just released the state seal of civic engagement. I have not heard whether or not that will be incorporated in the CCI, but we'll talk about 2 things that are kind of like up and coming in the CCI towards the end. So it is important to know that it, just like our status, it changes year to year. And so what we say today will be updated pretty much on an annual basis. Something will come along where we're changing how data is taken in or what language we're using around it. So even if you've already seen us do this show a few times, if you hear us come back next year, it might be time for another refresh because the state is always doing a little bit things new and different and improved. So keep an eye out as we go forward. In some districts, we also have military leadership or JROTC programs. Those are also eligible as part of our kind of their own completer program. And so a student who completes at least 2 years of those courses and scores a level 3 or higher in ELA or math and a level 2 or higher on the other will be considered prepared through the completion of that program. So these just a few extra notes when you go through the slides on some of those as well. And here's something that's near and dear to my heart. And if you ever want to know anything about CTE, Career Technical Education, track me down because this is my jam. But CTE pathway completion is another one of these. This is one of the things, oh, and I see someone asking about the ASVAB that is coming up, that we do have a slide on that coming up. But with CTE pathway, this is going to be 2 sequenced courses in the same sector. So if a student wants to change from one course to another and one pathway to another, that's a choice. We're not stopping them from doing that, but there's real intentionality and legal requirements from the state in our funding for CTE to start with one course and then go to another course. Sometimes it's a 3-course sequence, and that would be introductory, concentrator, and capstone. If it's a 2-course sequence, you skip the intro class altogether, you do a concentrator and a capstone course. And so it's really important that they're coded properly, that students who enter the first course in the sequence are strongly encouraged to stick it out and go into the second course in that sequence because that's the only way that they'll be considered a completer. And the reason isn't just because we want our brownie points as a school, but those capstone classes have amazing opportunities like internships or certifications that students earn, and a lot of them get college credit through articulation. So those pathways are meant to be 2 or more courses in a single pathway up to that's 300 hours. So they have to be year-long courses and completing with a C- or better to be considered this. So pathway completion alone is not enough. That is going to be a you pick 2 yet again. If I complete a pathway, I also need to either do well on those Smarter Balanced assessments or get a college credit course or complete my A through G requirements, right? So these are all ways that I can be considered a prepared student using CTE pathway completion.
Okay, and then near and dear to a counselor's heart is the A through G requirements. And as you can see in this section, it's large. So A through G in itself is 1 bucket. And of course, to meet A through G, students must have a C- grade or better, as well as one of the following areas. So they can be either a CTE completer, a Smarter Balanced level of a 3 and a 2, and or college credit or AP and IB. So those are all areas in which a student, when they meet A through G, they must have one of the additional elements as well. So we are going to check your knowledge. And if you have the link, which I believe Zarette has put in the chat to this document, you might want to go ahead and pull it up so you can see it. If you have old eyes like me, sometimes that tiny print is hard to read, but we're just going to run through a couple of student examples. So again, this is a great document to have up. So let's try this out. So for student number 1, they completed all of their A through G requirements except for a D in 1 course. Have they met that requirement for A through G? No, because they have to have a C- or higher. So thank you, Joy. Yes, please play along in the chat. Lets me know that you're there. Okay, number 2, and go ahead and take a look and see if you can find it. They scored a 3 on the ELA and a 2 on the math. So if we look at Smarter Balanced Summative Assessment, scored a level 3 or higher on both ELA and math. So did they meet that requirement? Some of you are saying yes. Again, score a level 3 or higher on both ELA and math. And this student scored a 3 on the ELA and a 2 on the math. There we go. All right, the answer is no. Okay, they have to have a 3 on both tests. And of course, if on A through G, we know that we have the smarter balanced assessment over here, but because we already X'd out A through G, then it X's out all of these other categories as well. Okay, so they have to, the first one has to be met before the additional ones will be looked at. And then number 3, completed a CTE pathway, and the answer is yes. Now, of course, we didn't put on there the capstone in that little brief description, but they can, let's just assume they completed the capstone in my question here, but they did complete a CTE pathway of 300 hours. And when we look now at the other 2 options, score a level 3 or higher in ELA or math, and score a level 2 or higher in ELA and math, did they meet the requirement? And the answer is yes. So is this student prepared? And the answer is yes. So you can see how that works. And then now your school will have a number that shows a positive that this student was prepared by meeting the CTE pathway completion plus the one other option of the smarter balanced assessment. Okay, so let's look at one more example. So,
Yeah, on the last example, someone asked on the A through G requirements, what if the class is validated?
Validated in that for A through G, that is a very good question. So let's say in my example that it was a D for the second semester. So I can see that if they're going into the next math or science, I should have clarified, let's say that the answer was an English class, for example. So that's gonna be a D in an English class, and that student would have to make it up, and no, they wouldn't have met it. Validation, I think because you'd be looking at other areas where they would meet A through G for those courses, but a D first semester math and a B in the second, yes, then they would meet the A through G. Thank you. Okay, so this one, student number 2, completed all of the A through G requirements. Okay, and we'll assume they got a C or higher. So yes. Completed one CTE course with a C. What's the answer there? They completed one CTE course with a C. Did they meet the CTE pathway completion?
Good job, everyone. That's a no to complete both sequenced courses.
That is a no, okay? So I check it off here because yes, they made A through G, but they also need to meet one of the other 4 areas. And that's also gonna mark an X over here. So number 7 is out, okay? Scored a 2 on both math and ELA. So let's look at this area here because we still wanna see if this student is an A through G completer. So they scored a 2 on both math and ELA. Did they meet the smarter balanced assessment area? Okay. The answer is no and no. Okay, so it checks out both number 1 and the second bucket for A through G. And then the last question, completed 3 AP courses and scored a 3 on 1 test and a 2 on 2 tests. Did they meet the A through G over here? I mean, the advanced placement over here? Did they meet it up here? So the first one, did they meet it up here? They completed 3 AP courses and scored a 3 on 1 test and a 2 on 2 test. Did they meet this one? No.
Nope.
Good. And over here, score of a 3 or higher on 1 AP exam or IB score. Did they meet it there? And the answer correct is yes. Okay, so we're gonna check it off number 2 as being not met, but it is met over here. So do we have a student that is prepared? The answer is Yes, because they met the A through G plus 1. So now this student is prepared. Okay? And all of this, of course, is making sure the student has a high school diploma plus 1 of these to be marked prepared. And our last example, you guys are getting good. Student number 3 has not completed A through G requirements. So we know right now, okay, if they didn't complete A through G, that one's going to be checked off as no. They passed the state seal of biliteracy. So up here, when we look at this element, they just need to pass it. So did they meet this requirement right here? Just passing the state seal of biliteracy? Yes. Okay, and then scored a 2 on ELA and a 3 on math. Did they meet this requirement underneath the state seal? No. And then if we look over here at number 1, did they meet this requirement? Score of a level 3 or higher on both ELA and math? No, because they got a 2 on ELA. So when we look at this one, it's a no there and a no there. So is student number 3 prepared? Great. The answer is no. So these are areas as you are working with a student on their plan, on their course selections. Jewyl talked about the importance of making sure that if they're going to be a CTE pathway completer, that they take that capstone class. And so these are all conversations that we have with students when we are talking to them about their next year's courses. And so there are areas that we need to be aware of, not just meeting A through G for college entrance, but now meeting A through G and one other area in order to mark the student as prepared for your school's dashboard. You know, maybe we want to encourage a student to take an advanced placement class, to challenge themselves. If they've already met A through G, but not one of these other things, what do we might need to do so that we can increase our score? So it's changing our practice and our mindset to be aware of these other areas that California is evaluating our schools. And so here we have the new ASVAB reporting system. And Jewyl, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So, like I said earlier, the CDE is continuing to look at how they can improve this metric. When we look at the CCI, we want to make sure it has college and career components to this big indicator. And so as they dive deeper, what they do is they have a window of data that gets submitted before they decide if it's going to be included. So we have 2 metrics right now that are in this area where they are asking for data, but we don't yet know how it or if it will be part of the indicator. So one of those is ASVAB. And so at this point in spring of 2021, we are being asked to submit the highest ASVAB qualification test scores that students receive during the academic year. And so this will be part of the data that you roll up to the CDE with all of the other data that's going up. Now, if you're not doing anything with the ASVAB at this point, doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt you to not do it. It's just that the menu gets bigger the more things you offer to students, right? So if we look back at that diagram of all of the different elements, right, the menu just keeps getting bigger, and that means that we are acknowledging there are many ways that our students can be considered prepared for the college and career. Most other metrics also have something called very prepared, and we're still unsure if the CDE is going to do something in that space and if any of these metrics might be there. They use this data in a few ways, and one is to set our baseline so that we better understand what kinds of cutoff scores that they should look at as we go into using this data, and they also use it to determine whether or not it'll be included. So at this point, this still has to go to the State Board of Ed for inclusion, but they're going to wait until they have a couple of years of data in order to do that. So ASVAB is one of those places where they are asking for that data. And the other place, which we'll see on the next slide, is in work-based learning. Work-based learning is strongly aligned to CTE, but it's not only for CTE students. So this is another place where I see counselor role to be really important. You often know which of your students are, they're asking for letters of support for taking an internship or something like that. Those are all other metrics that are currently being considered for inclusion in the CCI. So you can see here's a huge list up here on the left, and the 3 brand new metrics that we've never seen before are internship, student-led enterprise, which is basically students running a small business, and then the one that says virtual simulated work-based learning. This is there's a secret. They're working on changing some of the language, and likely they're going to pull the word virtual out because this was language that was included before we even went into our learn from home status. And so a lot of people are really confused about that. But simulated work-based learning should be like a kind of a mock experience. And these should all be experiences that they have that are beyond what they're already getting credit for. So it's not necessarily embedded in their CTE pathway, but something they do as an extra metric on top. So you might get asked like, hey, we need you to include any students who have internships or any students who are part of a business. And so as you hear that and see that, that's just one more data set that we are trying to collect. We don't already have great ways to collect it, so it's a difficult thing to measure. And Priscilla, I believe these are the codes in CalPads here on the left. And so they'll be rolled up in the CalPads data. And so most districts are trying to figure out where in the SIS they're going to collect this so that when they roll it into CalPads, that whoever's doing your data at the district level knows where to find that information, because most of this actually is information housed right here in the minds of your teachers and has never been put down on paper before. And so I don't know. That's a great question about like data verification. And at this point, it's just collecting the hours that you'll submit in CalPads. All right. So we are going to go through a fun little exercise, and you might want to follow along in the worksheet that Zarette just dropped in here. And we are going to play a little game where Tanya pretends to be a brand new counselor at Cypress High School. We picked a high school outside of our county, so we wouldn't be picking on any of our own folks. So apologies to any of you from Orange County who might be familiar with Cypress High, but that is kind of our little model one. Now, what you'll see is when she just put in 2019, did maybe just put Cypress and see, it might be Cypress Senior High School or something like that. So you put in the name, you go to casschooldashboard.org, and it's going to bring up this search. This is where you're going to put your own school in. You can get the school, or you can get your district. So they do aggregate all of the data. So we're just going to give her a second to pull up Cypress High School.
Where is it?
I think you just take out the high school part, just put in Cypress, because it is, I think it might be like Cypress Senior High. Just, yeah, try that. Oh, just because it's Cypress High, no school. All right, so sometimes the search is a little funky in that, but if we jump into here, let's start out and see, this is your dashboard. It just kind of brings everything up. So Tanya, on this page, what color is your college and career indicator? As a new counselor there at Cypress High, what would you say is the color of your school for CCI?
Green.
Perfect. If you scroll down a little bit, what you're going to see is what we might call like the baseball cards of each one of the indicator. And so you'll get a little bit of info on student population. Scroll a little bit more. And now you're going to get what we call like the baseball card. And you'll see a little version of this on that worksheet that we gave you. And just a reminder, if you're like, wait, where's all this data? I pulled up my school and none of it's here. Make sure you're in 2019, because 2020 had very limited data. And so you won't see all these baseball cards and all the color coding in the 2020 version of the dashboard. And that's just a little easy pull down there at the top. So if we start here, let's see what percent of your students there at Cypress High in 2019 were considered prepared on the CCI.
Or English language.
Try the college and career.
Looking over here, sorry. 69%
No, that's fine.
prepared.
You're a new counselor. How would you know how to navigate this? Great. So you'll see right there on the baseball card that little 69.4%. So that tells you your overall of all of your students together. And what was your percent increase?
3.5%.
Great. That seems like a quality percent. So that is probably one of the reasons you're in green. So we want to know a little bit more. So if you click on that view more details, just right at the bottom of that little baseball card, it's going to go to the next page, but give it a second because it will actually bring you straight to the college and career section on that page. And today we're not just talking about overall data. We really want to get into the equity-minded side of this. So if you scroll down a little bit, you're going to see all of the different student groups here. So we know that the average is green for this school. So who is just ahead of the curve, doing really well and beating that school average?
That would be our Asian, Filipino, and white students.
Okay. And do we have any students who are falling below the school average?
Right in the middle is our students with disabilities, but for the most part, no, not really.
Yeah, so students with disabilities are below the green of the regular school, but they're still yellow, which is actually a fairly good number. Now, one interesting thing here is we have a bunch of groups with no performance color. So if you click on that, or scroll down a little bit, it's right below, there we go. If you go down a little bit, you're going to see even more data about each one of these. So we can look specifically right now what you see, the students with disabilities. It doesn't just tell you the color, but it tells you the status and the change. Holy moly, they increased the scores of their student with disabilities by how much?
9%.
That is an awesome impact, right? So we know that even if they are yellow, they have less than 30% of those students with disabilities in the prepared, they're doing a lot of work to increase that number, and they've had a 9% increase. Now let's see in the no performance color, what's going on there? All right, we have two kinds of versions of this. What could you tell me if you look at the African American and the American Indian data sets? What's different about those two sets of data that we can see?
Well, even though our African American students, we have 17.6% prepared, there's only 17 students. And then our American Indian students, we have only 3.
Yeah. So when we have less than 11 students, by putting their data on a public website, it would really say like, oh, I could point my finger at an individual student. And so due to privacy concerns, any data set with less than 11 students will not be displayed on the California School Dashboard. You might see a difference if you looked at the full district, because at a district level, you may have, over the 33 number that would give you a color, or at least over 11 students, so you'd know what their status and change is. The African American population here, what you can see is that there are only 17 students. However, those 17 students, only 17.6% of them are prepared. So that, even though it's not on our color meter, it is an area that we should be really considering how we're supporting those students. Why are they not hitting that metric? Now, it's really hard because we already talked about there's 8 different ways you can meet the California indicator. So although this is a really nice fancy interface, there is the most amazing data page you've ever seen if you click at the top on View Additional Reports. Now, we're getting into an area that's not as fancy looking. So scroll down just a little bit, and on the left, you're gonna select the College Career Measures Report. So that's right underneath all the 5x5s, but those are all super cool reports that you should definitely check out if you're a data nerd like me, or even if you're not, because you are here, and so data is important. All right, do not be overwhelmed. We are gonna get into this giant grid.
Going slow.
So here we have 690 students in our graduating cohort. And so that's the total number of students. about 69.4% of them are prepared. But here you can actually see that broken down by demographics. And so this is where we can really have that equity mindset. If we have certain student populations who we need to really strategize about, then we can kind of get into the nitty gritty here. So if we scroll down, we can look at our prepared numbers, and it starts to get really insightful when we get into this big grid that has kind of like oranges and reds and browns. So there's a lot of different data on here. I'm going to skip down to my favorite part, which is this part right here. Okay, so this is looking at just the students who are considered prepared. So on this particular document, the darker the color, the better you're doing. And so where is Cyprus doing the best when it comes to preparedness?
Over here in the SVAB scores.
Yeah, if you scroll down, I think there might be another one in there. Whoa, look at that, A through G. All right, all student groups that meet the numerical ability to include them on this data set are in that awesome color. So that's probably, the A through G completion is probably a really important component of what they do at Cypress High School. And now what we can see, now remember, students don't have to just meet 2, they could meet all of them. And so the numbers don't necessarily add up percentage-wise if you did some kind of math on them, but we can see, so some students are meeting things differently. Now, if we look up and down though, we can see actually African American, more students are in CTE and Smarter Balanced and college credit. But how many African American students are we even talking about here?
We've got 2, 2, 2, 2, 3.
2 students. We already know that there were only 17 students in this graduating class who were African American from, oh no, who were prepared, I think. But only 2, that's not a lot of, no, there were a total of 17 students. That's why they weren't in the colors, right? So only 2 of the 17 kids completed a CTE pathway. Only 3 were A through G completers. So even though their colors are brighter here, it's because the percentage is high out of a very small population. But it might be a place where you could just help a few more students get there and you double your numbers, right? So we can look at this and we can say, where do we have nothing happening at our school?
So over here in our college credit courses,
very little, right? So this is probably a situation where there's no dual enrollment, there's no bigger program, and it's really just a few students taking college credit courses on their own. We also see, in San Diego County, I usually go through all of the college credit data because it aligns a lot to CTE, and all of our comprehensive high school districts were in the 10% or less range. Besides, San Diego Unified was almost 50%. And one of the big reasons that they have so many students getting college credit courses on their transcript is because they have board policy that gives a 5-point A for a college credit course. And so if a student is then incentivized to transcript it. We know that we have all these kids who are really hitting that high GPA. And so anything that they are going to put on their transcript that's a 4-point A can actually drag them down. And so why would we let a college course drag a student down? They've actually acknowledged that. And that means that their data set is huge when it comes to college credit courses. So it's also, that's an example of a district who really saw the benefit of incentivizing getting that data rolled in. So this is all of what's going on. The other thing you would say, there's no IB program here. Great. Like I said earlier, it's just a smaller menu for students to choose from, but IB program is a real big kitchen to cook in. So, either you have that or you don't. And if you scroll down, I wonder if they are in the same boat when it comes to the leadership and military science. So you're not dinged for not having those. It just means that the students have fewer things that get them to that. To me, one of the most interesting places as well is to look at the approaching prepared section. If you scroll down a little bit, there's a whole nother section similar to what we just saw, where the students are approaching prepared. And here what we can see is these are kids who, if they just did one more thing, just one more thing, they would probably hit that prepared, right? So we look at these 18 students who completed their CTE pathway, wow, if they did well on this SBAC or got a college credit course or A through G completion, they would have been boosted up into that very prepared. The same, you have a bunch of kids who are A through G completers who, like, look at this, 6 African American students completed A through G. If we don't put them in a CTE pathway, or we look, 0 of those kids, well, there's none that are meeting SBAC and not the A through G. But that could also just be making sure that if they're meeting A through G, why aren't they meeting those SBAC requirements? Are we giving them the review or the structure that they need in order to ensure that their A through G preparation is rigorous enough to help them understand what's expected of them on SBAC? And so here again, college credit course is very low, and of course, leadership military science is not one of their programs there. So this is a place where I'd say, like, wow, we could get more A through G kids into CTE and vice versa, we'd have a lot more folks in here. So hopefully this was, I know this is a lot of data, it's a big chunk of information, but when you really want to move the needle on equity, both in a figurative sense and on the dashboard itself, digging deeper into this data is a huge way to do that. So we are going to dive back into some of the slides and go forward here. So this is just, go ahead.
Oh, no.
This is just an overview of what we just went through. So this is kind of the outline of that little worksheet that Zarette dropped in the chat, and that is linked here in here, so that you can basically, like, this is a great exercise if you have counselor meetings or PLC, if you're an administrator and you want to run through something with your site, whether it's counselors or administrators or all of your teachers, to gain an understanding. The little worksheet is a great piece, and all of this is just those steps that it took to get through all of the parts of that worksheet. So Joy, at this point, work-based learning has never, ever, ever been collected before this year. So the question is, it's not clear the actual numbers that are associated with work-based learning. And so there's no data coming out about work-based learning because we're only just starting to put the data in. And so if there is a link on that work-based learning page to one of the CalPADS kind of, what do you call it? The CalPADS data updates, what do they call them? Flash updates. And that will give you a little bit more information about that. And feel free to reach out to me individually. There's all these slide decks and things. And we did coerce the CDE to come and do a presentation to our leadership team on that particular metric. And it's very insightful because I asked a lot of tough questions. So I can share that video with you if you want more insight into the work-based learning metric. But no, right now it's not going to be seen until they decide whether it's going to even be included, and then the following year it will be included.
So then these are just questions that, as you're going through the dashboard, that you can ask, that you can take a look at and ask yourself. Like Jewyl said, bring it into a meeting and have everybody look at it just to see, do you know your numbers? Do you know where your subgroups are, where you might be able to, as she said, increase one thing to have your students be marked as prepared. It's just good information to look at and to explore, because the more you know, the better. And it helps you, like I mentioned earlier, change your mindset and how you, when you're meeting with students about their next courses for the following school year, also their graduation plans, it just helps in that planning purpose to have just some additional things maybe noted that you would want to check with the student to push them to that next level. So I'm not going to show this video, but I do want, because of time, but please feel free to go back. It's a great one that Castle put together just on the student voice. And, you know, students who, what do they expect from adults? What are they wanting? And what are they wanting at their schools? And so it's a great video. I know, especially for school counselors who love just that hearing from students. It's a great way to just kind of connect you with the reason why we're all doing what we're doing and why it is so important for us to know this data. Oops. So a question you do want to ask yourself is, how does your school counseling program help create spaces where all young people can thrive? So we're not going to do that question in the chat just for time's sake, but that is a good question to think about as you're going through this work. I did want to share an example of a school that was able to kind of go through this and take a look at their data and how they use the data they found on the dashboard to really improve their graduation rates. So we had launched this PD opportunity with Hatching Results, in which we had counseling teams, counselors with their school administrators come together to take a look at their interventions, to take a look at their MTSS model, and really see what areas could they improve upon. And then the task was to find a data set and put it in a flashlight presentation. So one of our schools in our area did that, and then they shared their results at our school counselor conference. And so I just want to walk through how they use the data they found to share it out. And I think you'll be impressed. And I think their stakeholders were really impressed as well. So we all hopefully know about MTMDSS, and that's just another slide again that you can refer back to, but how it promotes equity and how it's important to really provide programs that are data driven so that we are putting out the best services that show what all students can achieve. And I thought this was a great example that Hatching Results put together on areas that we need to take a look at, especially in our tier 2. You know, when we look at deficiencies where students are struggling with attendance and engagement, all those areas that are measured on the dashboard, where are some missed opportunities where we can close those gaps with our student groups? And so we can take a look at, you know, haven't enrolled in rigorous courses. Maybe they're not involved in school extracurricular activities. All of these things lead to higher graduation rates when we close the gap. They lead to students being marked prepared as CCI on the CCI. So when we take a look at our subgroups and see, okay, where can we improve? It really helps you in your whole school to meet some of the higher measures. So why should we share and measure our results? Well, we all know that as school counselors and in maintaining our positions on our campuses, as well as increasing school counselors with our high caseloads, we need to show why we are important on campus. And now more than ever, with funding coming down from the state and the federal government, we need to make sure that we are highlighting our data and that we are showing the effectiveness of what we do. So these are just reasons why, again, and reminders as to why it's important to share our work. So this is the school. It's a very small academy, but they had a big impact. So these two school counselors put together this quick flashlight report. I'm going to go through it very quickly. You'll have access to it, but I just want to show you how they use the dashboard in planning what they wanted to focus on and then where they were able to take and show results on. So what they looked at and their goal was that at the end of each school year, they would have an overall graduation rate, it would increase 100%. So again, I mentioned this is a small school and I'll show you those demographics in a second, but their goal to increase the graduation rate by 100% from 14%, I'm not making that up, to 28%. That was their goal by June 2019 and then to 56% by June 2020. So this school opened up in 2017-18. Now at the time they have approximately 40 students, primarily high school transfers and 19 to 24-year-olds who are extremely credit deficient, had possibly dropped out of school or fit the at-promise criteria. So it's an alternative school where students, you know, were coming to get their high school diploma. And at the time, their graduation rate was 14%. They hadn't had a school counselor on board. And their LCAP goal, they also wanted to ensure that all students were on track for graduation. So how could they look at their data and see how to improve? So here's what they did. So to decrease the dropout rates and improve their graduation rates, they wanted to monitor all of their progress. And so they hired those two school counselors, Stacy and Roger, to do just that. So what they valued and thought was important was that supporting students in developing individual learning plans is an important and appropriate role of the school counselor. And they attached the data from ASCA, showing why that was important. They also highlighted our domain. We have to make sure people know. One thing I highlighted in the Marketing Our School program webinar was that we can never assume that people know what we do. We can't assume. You have to tell them. And I know that can be hard. We don't want to brag or share, but we have to in order to show our value and worth, because people do not know what school counselors do. So what are they going to do? They're going to assign you tasks that don't fit under your role. And so here they took to show why it was important. And we do have a domain. Counselors have standards to follow. And so this is what they focused on. And they, like you can see here, one of their behavior strategies was to actively engage in challenging coursework, a behavior self-management skill, demonstrate perseverance to achieve long and short-term goals. So they were going to work with their students on these individual planning needs. They also highlighted that this is an ed code that we need to develop and implement with parent involvement, the students' immediate and long-range educational plans. So who's doing that? That's in ed code, that schools are supposed to be doing this, and that should fall under the role of a school counselor. The school also highlighted their LCAP goal that was probably written by their administrators at that site. We will ensure that students are on track to graduate from high school. And look at this one, this will make Jewyl happy, have access to college and career technical education. And as we saw, that's an indicator for the CCI. And then they developed a school counseling program aligned with that LCAP goal. And again, this is all in just bullet points, but who is this gonna make happy? Your stakeholders, your administrators, your board. So you are talking their language when you throw out ed code, LCAP, and how the school counseling program can align with that. So they also shared process data, which was the who, when, and what this was going to look at. So they were looking at the who. It's going to be all of their students that were currently enrolled. They were going to start with the fall 2018 and go through present. They were going to all receive individual academic planning in the form of these three areas: a transcript graduation status review, a graduation course plan, and then they were going to be monitored. And it's going to be in partnership with the student's teacher. And then the perception data, because they were doing this in a quick fashion, they wanted to immediately improve student academic progress. No perception data was collected, but again, putting that out there for your stakeholders to see is important. And these are some areas that they saw and got some feedback on. So here's where they landed. So in 2018, remember we talked about a 14% graduation rate? In 2 years, they had a 465% increase from 14% to 79.2%, which is huge, with students who were not engaged in school, who were coming back to get their diploma, but now because they had someone working with them on a plan, we're now at 465%. Now, where do you see that they got their graduation rate from? The California School Dashboard. So again, as school counselors, looking at that data, where is our graduation rate and how might we be able to improve that? Do you think their stakeholders are gonna fire their school counselors or let them go? Absolutely not. Not when you speak this language. So again, that's where that California dashboard has so many great ways to show your work. They also took it a step further to show their graduation rate amongst subgroups: low socioeconomic students, Hispanic, and white. So you can see here, there was a decreased gap from their SES students from 15.4% to 5%, which was a reduction of 68% of students in the graduation rate. And then you can see over here, that had a decreased gap for Hispanic students from 18.1% to 5.5%, which was a reduction of 82%. So again, you're speaking their language, you're showing how and why amongst your subgroups broken down, how efficient and valuable the work was. So I show this example, and again, they have a summary to show where their rates were, and to again show that the individual academic planning should be a permanent element when developing a school counseling program, and the background information to support that. They also included all of their lessons learned, limitations, and next steps, which you can read when you get the access to this. But again, I wanted to make sure that you could see how to put all of this together. and to support your work. And it's going to look different from school to school, district to district. But you take one thing like a graduation rate and show how you can make a change, then you're gonna be in that position for a long time. So then we wanted to share some additional resources, and Jewyl, I'll let you speak about this one.
Well, this is under construction, but what we are working on is kind of a one-stop shop so that you don't have to come to us and get that information every time in these kinds of webinar formats. So we are building a website now. We started making little videos about each one of these areas, and then we had to update all of our handouts. So as we dive into here, what you'll see is we'll be updating these videos and ensuring that there are resources here for you when you are looking for ways to improve on the CCI. And also there's a list of all of us on our CCI engagement team where we can help support you in different components of the CCI. Additionally, on the CDE website, we know that you are consistently trying to communicate with parents, and it turns out that the CDE has developed some tools to help you with that. So if you go to the CDE website, there's actually like little embedded tabs because they like to make things a little bit complicated. And if you click on the parent and family tab, so you scroll down just a little bit, and right here you'll see there's all these tabs. So under parent resources, there's different videos that help you communicate with families. And also if you look at the top, there is a translations tab as well. So many of the resources, if you scroll down back to where that tab was for educators, there you go, there's a translations tab that has translated materials. So if as a site you're sharing with families in some of your engagement meetings about the dashboard results, there are resources here for parents and families, and many of them are translated into other languages, particularly Spanish.
And then the last two resources on this page are taking the infographic that we provided with all of the buckets, plus these other two charts that the CDE puts out, and they've created some other worksheets in which to share the data. So we have added links to those. These are relatively new. They came out in January 2021. So if that's an easier way to understand CCI, we've provided those as well. So these are the measures of college readiness, and these are the measures of career readiness. So it shows just another way to look at the information and the data. All right, so that was a lot, and our goal was to make sure that we finished by 11:30. So we're sorry we rushed through that last part, but Zarette, I believe, is putting, yes, she already put the link to the slide deck into the chat, but we really would appreciate any or all of your feedback. It's a very short survey. And before we end, I just want to thank Jewyl for joining us today. As you know, she and Cattell is an expert on all of this and a great resource to our county. So if you are from San Diego, Jewyl is the girl to talk with, to reach out to, especially around CTE. She's so knowledgeable around that area. And she is a great advocate for school counselors. So please make sure that you have our contact information there. And if you have further questions, that you reach out to either one of us. But if you could, again, make sure to take our quick survey and give us some feedback. Also, some positive feedback would be great for each of the presenters. And then that way we just know moving forward how we can better and improve. So are there any other questions in the chat, Zarette?
No, we just have a wonderful thank you to our presenters from Priscilla.
All right. Okay, so again, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you come back for our Thursday and Friday webinars as we finish out the series. And with that, we'll take you out with some music, but thank you again for being here today.